Some families lost everything in the Colorado Spring Creek fire, one of the state's largest. So what are scientists saying about the future risks as the population continues to grow?
In Southern California, we'll find out how climate change is playing a role in the Golden State's greatest natural disaster.
Here in northern Arizona, communities are developing more near the forest than ever before. Coming up, we'll find out how the Forest Service is thinning the forest to make sure there are no catastrophic wildfires in the future.
Here in northern Arizona, many organizations are coming together to thin the forest in order to prevent wildfires. Now, this has been a very slow and steady process, and that's because it relies heavily on the timber industry.
This is Karen Fauché for KCT in California. Early in November, the conditions for wildfire were ripe for explosion in California. A combination of low humidity, strong wind, and drought-like conditions helped fuel a series of fires that would devastate the region and kill dozens of people.
Parents have been here since the 70s. Their house burned down. My brother's house burned down in Seminole Springs. Parents' house in Trancas. It's been a nightmare.
Within days of erupting, the Camp Fire in Northern California grew to become the most deadly and destructive fire in state history, destroying entire communities. Residents near Malibu were chased from their homes as the Wolseley Fire marched across their once bucolic neighborhood and through the canyons of Ventura County.
This is a bad one. And so many homes in so many areas, you know, all from Decker to Malibu West to Malibu Park to the Point, which has never burned in my lifetime of being here, has never burned on the Point. So this was a shock to a lot of people.
The Hill Fire, also northwest of Los Angeles, began on the same day as the Wolseley and Camp Fires. Firefighters now faced 3 wind-driven infernos determined to burn through the California landscape. California's long, dry summer is great for agriculture, and the Mediterranean climate is a huge draw for the millions of people who make the state home. But it also makes much of the state vulnerable for wildfires. In a normal year, October brings rain and relief from the drought, but this year, the rains didn't come, making the vegetation as dry as it is in the height of the summer.
Unbelievable.
Santa Ana winds are also common during the fall and the winter in California. This year, they came with a roar, reaching 60 to 70 miles per hour in some places. The heat actually creating its own weather, like this fire tornado. The fire came too fast for many people.
I had actually been out of town, so I didn't even have a chance to save anything when the fire came through.
Firefighters concentrated on saving lives, leaving behind entire communities to burn.
I've been in the Paradise area since I was 4, so it's not just losing a house, it's losing my community.
From California to Colorado to Arizona, increasing wildfires are threatening life and property.
I'm Lori Jane-Gliha, reporting for Rocky Mountain PBS in Colorado, where one of the state's largest wildfires recently devastated hundreds of homes like this one. And as the population continues to grow, so does the risk.
In your mind, you know it could happen, but you never think it's going to happen to you.
Crumbled concrete and metal debris mark the lots where dozens of homes once stood in Colorado's serene Forbes Park neighborhood.
You know that going in that's a risk you take.
Volunteer firefighter Brent Poindexter knows the danger of building in an area surrounded by a dense forest filled with thick pines.
And it's probably more of a not if it's going to happen, it's more of when.
Neighbors Pat and Griff Pritchard recognized the risks too.
We just kept saying, you know, if anything happens, it's just a tinderbox up here.
Yeah.
And in the summer of 2018, something did happen. Flames from a man-made blaze grew into the state's 3rd largest wildfire in history. It ravaged more than 100,000 acres of land and turned Tracy Wetzler's dream house overlooking the mountains into a mound of ash in a matter of hours.
There's some shingles. This is a pile of shingles that were extra.
17 years ago, Wetzler and her husband Dick couldn't resist this remote getaway in Costilla County, Colorado.
And then over the hill there, that's where your house.
Right, so this is So you can see the pile of debris that's in the dumpster there.
It seemed like the perfect place to find peace and build a home. So much so, she convinced her parents, the Pritchards, to build one too. Theirs was one of the first homes to go. Hundreds of others were damaged or destroyed.
We just went past house after house that was just in rubble, and we got to our property. There were no words.
I'm mad that it happened to me. But I'm more mad that it happened to them and I can't fix it. You know, you want to make it, I think they want to fix it for us. We want to fix it for them, and you can't.
It is what it is, and you can't change it. So rather than be depressed about it, move on. So.
The Forbes Park neighborhood sits in the middle of what state forest officials say is a high-risk area for fire.
You see all these areas of red in here. Red means it's the most intense risk.
State Forester Mike Lester says communities like it are part of the Wildland-Urban Interface, or WUI, a place where man-made structures sit within or very close to flammable vegetation or fuels, making the danger for fire even greater.
There is a lot of places for people to move. Now, whether they should move there or not, or what they need to be cognizant of, that's another matter altogether. They do need to think about the fuels in the neighborhood, the materials they use to build their homes. These are all things you need to think about.
In Colorado, state data shows half the population now lives in a WUI, up about 12 percentage points from 6 years ago. And in areas across the West, danger zones like these are growing as the population expands. There are natural contributors that affect fire behavior too. In Colorado, for example, Lester says beetles killed millions of forest acres in recent decades, more than ever has been observed by forest officials in Colorado history. They left behind brittle trees and brush. Lester says improving the forest's health can prevent future problems.
I would say when you have a forest that's overcrowded with fuels, probably your safest bet is to use logging equipment to remove that fuel.
Brent Poindexter took us on a tour to show us how fast fire can spread even when neighbors take special precautions to remove trees and brush from around their homes.
So basically this is where, when this part of the fire came over the hill right here and went across, and then on the other side over there is where my house is.
He says the strategy for stopping a burn has changed over the years, especially with more humans and structures in vulnerable areas.
If there wasn't these houses weren't here, we would obviously just let it burn and let Mother Nature do its thing. But now that these guys put their, I'm just a rookie, I've been on one fire now, but they put their lives on the line to save people's structures.
Even as firefighters take increased risks,
it just looks small, pretty much.
Sometimes it's not enough. Brent Poindexter.
That's the stove from upstairs. That's basically right above where that stove is, was the kitchen.
Lost his own home.
These fires are, what I think people don't understand is the fire's here, but the wind's blowing embers on the other side of the valley. So a mile away, another fire pops up over there. There's really nothing you can do.
When you try to think, what could I have done different to have protected my home, I think for some of them there was enough time for the Type 2 fire team to get in and start protecting homes.
For Tracy Wetzler and her family,
that was out the back of our house.
The fire risks do not outweigh the beauty and tranquility of the Forbes Park neighborhood. The plan now, to move forward, each with an empty lot, a blank slate, and endless new possibilities.
Here in Flagstaff, more trees does not necessarily mean a better forest. The U.S. Forest Service is working with multiple partners to make sure that the forest is thinned in order to prevent worse and more wildfires. Near Flagstaff in northern Arizona, homes are going up in communities right next to national forest land. It's an ideal space for nature lovers, but the nature needs to be managed, especially when fire is as critical to the land as water and air.
We just want more of the fire that behaves the way it naturally should. These forests here need fire to survive.
Brienne Pettit is a spokeswoman for the Four Forests Restoration Initiative, or 4FRI. 4FRI is a multi-agency partnership spanning 4 national forests from the Grand Canyon to the eastern Arizona border. 4FRI got its start in 2009 with federal funding, following years of unnaturally large and devastating wildfires in northern Arizona. Those fires were hotter and more intense because the dense ponderosa tree forests in this area are not normal.
Behind us is an area that hasn't been thinned, and you can actually see the density of the trees.
Dick Fleshman helps manage tree thinning operations for 4FRI.
Imagine, if you will, a fire moving through this ecosystem right now. If the fire gets up in the canopy, it can actually run straight through that canopy, actually burn quite hot and actually quite destructively.
What 4FRI does is manually take out the younger ponderosa trees to create a completely different looking landscape than what residents are used to. Today's more volatile forest is more than 100 years in the making. Historically, land managers who came to Arizona in the late 1800s logged the old, bigger trees and let ranch animals eat the underbrush. Combined with modern-day efforts to extinguish fires as soon as they start, allows more trees to grow, and the result is a monoculture, a habitat dominated by one species. Just like in any human environment, diversity is essential to a thriving population. You can see this clearly south of Flagstaff. On one side of a fence is privately owned land that has not been thinned. On the other, a 4FRI area of large grassy expanses and separate clumps of older trees.
Here, with the grassy openings, you can see actually the fire would actually get on the ground, burn as a surface fire.
That's an important distinction. Surface fires burn low and slow, while a fire in the trees burns hot and fast and destructive. Fleshman says the forests closest to where people live is high priority for restoration, because not only would a wildfire burn trees, it also burns soil, which makes conditions ripe for catastrophic flood events in the rainy season. 2 of Arizona's biggest wildfires, the Rodeo Chetaskai and Wallow fires, burned for weeks and caused hundreds of millions of dollars of damage. Part of that damage was to the water supply because the fires burned on the forest watershed.
When the forest burns, the water that's produced is of terrible quality. It's full of silt. It has harmful chemicals in it. It erodes the landscape and fills our reservoirs with sediment. And it's just a bad situation all the way around.
Charlie Esther manages all the river water that feeds into Salt River Project's reservoir system, which makes up 60% of Phoenix's drinking supply. Those reservoirs still have silt and chemicals from past wildfires, which travel through the canals to cities, and cities have to filter those pollutants out in their treatment plants. That's why SRP is part of forest restoration too.
This is such a huge task. You can't just pay for it to get done. Government doesn't have enough money to pay for it. We need to get industry in here to make a product, sell that product, make a profit, and actually want to thin the forest because it's good business.
Voters in the city of Flagstaff passed a $10 million bond 5 years ago to help. But even that alone is not going to be enough to treat the amount of forest covering the city's watershed. Arizona Game and Fish Department Coordinator Steve Rosenstock says that ballot initiative is just one way to move the forest restoration forward.
That is a very, very unique thing. And, in these times when budgets are tight, having that other source of funding can make the difference between a project happening or not.
This year was a record low year for snow and water runoff, which could have been a recipe for a very bad wildfire season. Rosenstock says with more education and a well-timed rainy season, northern Arizona got away with minimal fire this year.
There's only so much we can do. Mother Nature ultimately has the control over things. She holds the big levers, but we're doing all we can, particularly in these kind of restoration efforts, to get these systems back into balance so that they'll be more capable of weathering those droughts when they do occur.
The forest will keep changing with humans' help, but the process is slow, which has a lot of folks saying it's only a question of when, not if, the next major wildfire could happen in Arizona.
I'm David Nazar with PBS SoCal in Los Angeles. Here in Southern California, the worry of wildfires interfacing with wildlands and densified urban sprawl has become a serious concern. Could climate change be one of the reasons the Thomas Fire raged on for weeks. Southern California, December 2017. Several massive wildfires attacked the region from all corners, from southern San Diego County all the way to northern Ventura County and Santa Barbara. The combination of these fires scorched hundreds of square miles and destroyed or damaged thousands of homes, forcing both mandatory and voluntary evacuations throughout several Southland counties. Many scientists now believe climate change is a major contributor of wildfires in California and across the nation, particularly in western states like Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah.
Wildfire is a really interesting sustainability issue.
Alex Hall is a climate scientist with the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability at UCLA. Hall directs the Center for Climate Science and is with the university's Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences Department.
For the past 200 years or so, we've been burning fossil fuels. That has led to an increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Greenhouse gases trap heat, and that has led to a steady warming of the planet that has been accelerating in recent decades. Fires are driven by dry and hot winds, and when winds become hotter and drier, that leads to greater fire risk. Climate change also affects vegetation. It tends to dry out vegetation during our hot summers, and it dries it out more as the climate warms more, and so that can create a greater risk for fire as well.
Ironically, we are interviewing Alex Hall on the roof of one of the UCLA campus buildings, just a few minutes from where the Skirball fire and the Bel Air fire in the wildland region you see off in the distance surrounded UCLA during the December 2017 inferno. UCLA was in fact a staging area for firefighters and emergency responders trying to fight the blazes where these hillside wildlands and LA's densified urban sprawl intersect.
Climate change increases the dryness of the winds when they occur. It increases the temperature of the winds when they occur. And it also increases the swings between very wet and dry years. So what happened with the fires last season were a great example of what's to come with fire. We had a really, really big wet season in 2016-2017, and that led to a buildup of vegetation. That vegetation dried out over the course of a very hot summer in 2017. And then the rainy season did not arrive as it should have. And so by the time we got to December, we had these very hot and dry Santa Ana events that occurred, and that was the perfect conditions for a very large fire. Climate change will increase the frequency of those types of events.
And based upon all your scientific data, you really do believe that this isn't just par for the course in normal Southern California, whether that climate change is playing a major role in this?
We're beginning to see the climate change signal emerge, certainly in the climate record. And then at the same time, the fires are also becoming unprecedented. We're seeing fires that are setting records in terms of their size and their intensity.
Any wildfire could have devastating consequences: the loss of life, the structural damage, the tremendous financial toll, and then there's the environmental toll. These disasters can destroy forested areas, damage the habitat of plants and animals, deplete natural resources, and cause heavy smog, damaging the ozone because of the enormous amounts of carbon dioxide. Despite all this, scientists explain wildfires, particularly forest fires, can actually benefit the environment. They can rid forested areas of dead and decaying matter and provide natural fuel during drought periods. They can also help the ecosystem balance because they destroy diseased plants and dangerous insects like the bark beetle that has decimated millions of acres of California forest over the past decade. And the fires even regenerate seeds for trees that require intense heat every few years to sprout.
Wildfire is a natural part of our landscapes, and our natural landscapes actually need wildfire to regenerate, and we have to learn how to coexist sustainably with wildfire going forward. And that's something that we haven't done a great job with in California.
We do take a very personal feeling to what's going on here. So I hate to say this, but this could continue to be a very explosive and expansive event.
As a scientist, I'm very concerned about our sustainability relationship with fire. The most important thing that we can do to combat climate change is to stop burning fossil fuels. We need to replace those energy sources with renewable energy sources. Examples of those are solar power, wind power, hydropower. Those are the things we need to rely on in the future. We will see less warming in California, and that will lead to less of an impact on fire. That will lead to less of an increase in fire risk.
I'm Jordan Daphnis for Cronkite News, and I'm here in Flagstaff at a forest restoration site. Small trees may look beautiful, but they're not necessarily healthy for our forest. That's why the Forest Service, along with many other stakeholders, is working to remove them. Thinning trees in the woods may not be the most glamorous job in the world, but tree harvester Devin Suarez has wanted to be a lumberman since he was a kid.
I would always play cars with my best friend, and we would pretend that we had a logging company.
Last year, the Forest Restoration Initiative, a fire prevention and restoration effort, hired Suarez to help them thin the forest in northern Arizona. Neil Chapman is part of this effort.
Without well-informed loggers implementing this work, removing the small diameter trees, we're not going to get to the desired condition that we want on the ground.
Suarez left behind a law degree to begin this forestry business. It hasn't been easy, even with the help of the initiative.
It was very difficult to locate somebody that would, be able to provide or help us get equipment.
Suarez says his equipment would cost almost $500,000, so he rents it.
Renting this equipment is pretty expensive, so that kind of eats into our profits a little bit, but we had to do what we had to do.
And tree harvesting season relies on the weather. When it snows or rains, it's too damp for Suarez to operate equipment. Then there's the winter.
Middle to late of December, when it starts snowing and the ground gets too muddy. So you look at about January and February as a down season.
And then there's fire season.
Basically the whole month of June and some of July, we couldn't operate in fear of having to start a fire.
Suarez's goal, help prevent wildfires by thinning the forest. This helps keep wildfires from burning fast and hot and from getting close to communities. There's a lot of forest to thin, but it's hard for companies like Suarez to make a profit. The trees Suarez is contracted by the initiative to harvest are not the large, most profitable trees. Most are small trees that don't offer much wood.
The small and medium trees that we're removing are just such low value that it requires a whole lot of certainty and time to recover the investment that it takes to build infrastructure like sawmills and logging equipment.
Small payloads make it hard to find some place to process the wood. The closest lumber mill is more than 150 miles away in Phoenix.
So that gets pretty expensive on the shipping costs when we have to deliver that far.
The Forest Restoration Initiative hired Suarez and other tree harvesters as part of a plan to restore 2.4 million acres of trees over the next several decades. The initiative is making progress. More than 185,000 acres have been thinned so far. And Chapman says new iPad technology for tree harvest operators will hopefully cut cost and time.
So we came up with digital prescriptions. And so we have maps that show the operators very specific instructions as they go through the woods. And then the operators are able to implement that information by having a computer in the cab with them.
With this technology, Suarez and his team of 4 are able to remove thousands of trees.
We can typically cut about 4,000 trees, I'd say on average, maybe 4,500 on the higher end.
Because a healthy forest means more than just a pretty view. It's what the initiative believes will protect communities across the West.
I think it's a good cause, and it's a very good opportunity to reduce fire risk, where we can maintain the forest for future generations.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.